I'm here to listen. Why am I walking on this way?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Muse's AT Podcast, where you can relive my epic journey with me. This is Muse, and what follows is my Appalachian Trail story. Today's episode covers Friday, May 30th through Sunday, June 1st, 2025. And this is where the Trail Journal goes consecutive. Daily entries start on May 30th last year, going all the way through to December 18th. We're going to catch the first three of those daily entries in this episode, and here's where we're going to make a transition. No longer prepping at home, we will finish this episode up in Maine. And this episode, I'm pretty much going to let those entries speak for themselves, maybe hitting just a couple of points and then quickly opening up my gear spreadsheet so you can get a sense for where things were as Haley and I were getting ready to set off. Today's haiku is from June 2nd, 2025. Adventure beckons. Preparations now complete. Calm follows whirlwind. All right, let's define just a couple of terms here, and I think I'm going to try and go fairly quick because I think this episode is going to actually go a little bit long. But there is one term that comes up in the entry, and that is the term trail angel. And actually, before I even get into a trail angel, you really can't define a trail angel without defining trail magic. So trail magic is really anything given on trail in support of a hiker. And that can come in the form, and often does come in the form, of even just coolers left by the side of the trail, or rides, or water. And then sometimes that trail magic is actually people coming to the trail and like cooking out for you or whatever. So there are many varieties of trail magic, and it's always greatly appreciated. Trail magic always seems to come at the most opportune times. Now, a trail angel is somebody who provides trail magic. Many trail angels have some connection with the trail, but then some of them are just going to be nice strangers that you meet, like this lady Erin who's going to come up in the entry. I do want to give a little bit of context during the definition section here on the placement of the two towns, Millinocket and Munson, because I talk in the commentary about those towns with probably a little bit too much familiarity. So let's just make sure I've got you grounded. Millinocket would be the town that, as a southbounder, you stay in sort of first before your hike, because that lies just outside Baxter State Park. And then Munson is the town on the very southern end of the 100-mile wilderness. So you hit Millinocket first, then up Katahdin and out of Baxter in through the wilderness, and then come to Munson. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we kind of get into the entries is the Far Out app. We'll go into the Far Out app a little bit more, but for the purposes, just to give you an idea when that comes up in the commentary, it is the navigation app that we use. May 30th, 2025. Untitled. Pre-trail. Wow, it's been a whirlwind since Haley's graduation. There was celebrating the event, of course, followed by moving both kids back in, trying to get their ridiculous amount of stuff sorted and absorbed back into the house, seeing Evan off on his adventure, and the last bits of prep for ours. It's been fun, but it's been crazy. Special thanks to our awesome neighbors for a great send-off get-together, words of encouragement and inspiration, as well as thoughts and prayers. You guys are the best. Last weekend, Haley and I, and Ev too for his travels, received a blessing from our pastor, Father Glenn, for our safety and inspiration along the way. I haven't really said much yet about the purpose of this trip. I'll fill that in soon, as I think it's important to share, but a short version is that this is meant not just to be a journey on our feet, but even more primarily one of the soul. That blessing is much appreciated as we head out on that journey. May 31st, 2025. Last day at home. Pre-trail. Perfect last day before the trip. Chill day at home, spending time with Carrie, Haley, and Haley's boyfriend, Marcus. Just some good general family time. We played some code names. They made dumplings. I ate dumplings. It was great. Had lunch with my good friend John today. Not Johnny O from the earlier post, but actually you could say a different Johnny O. It had been a while, so we sat and talked for a couple of hours. It was wonderful to catch up. We're planning to meet somewhere in either Virginia or North Carolina this fall, and John will join us for a bit, which will be awesome. Went to Saturday evening mass, as travel schedule Sunday wasn't really going to allow for it, so not just to get out of making dumplings, and caught up with a few friends on the way out. Thanks to Jeff, George, Charlie, and Sue, as well as all my brothers and sisters from church, for your prayers to speed us along. June 1st, 2025. Travel day. Pre-trail. Started the journey early, leaving the house at 4:30 to catch our flight at 7. First flight to Newark, about a 3-hour layover, and then another short flight to Portland. In all, the wait times between bits of transportation made for a long day, but a fun one. Met my friend Katrin at a pizza place in Portland. She's from Dusseldorf, Germany, but has a strong connection to the States and gets back here at least once a year. It was cool that our trip up here coincided well with her vacation. She's leaving Maine tomorrow to hit some other spots in the U.S. before wrapping up her trip and heading back home. It was great to catch up, and the pizza was delicious. Portland seemed like a pretty cool place. It's a small city, definitely too big for the word town, but still has a feel as though it's nestled in the woods. From what I've now seen of Maine, it's hard to imagine any place in this state that doesn't have that feel. It's beautiful. The bus to Bangor didn't leave until 5:15, so we had a few more hours to kill there, but those passed quickly enough. It was in the bus station that you could say we met our first trail angel, even though we're not on trail yet. A nice lady, who we later came to know as Erin, was curious about our packs, and we talked about our upcoming adventure. After arriving in Bangor, she would approach Haley and me and offer us a ride to our hotel for the night. Haley and I then got to the hotel, grabbed dinner in the hotel restaurant, and headed to bed for the night, ready to continue the adventure tomorrow. Hey everyone! This is the part of the episode between the entry and the commentary, where as the podcast develops, I'll drop in an ad or two to get the bills paid. Nothing too intrusive, hopefully, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll pick up some trail-related sponsors. At this point, though, I thought I'd write an ad of my own and read it out. What I'm selling today is simply a plea to get in touch with me. I'll say it in the body of some of the episodes, but probably sometimes I won't, but I really do want to connect. Not only would I love feedback, truly, and am itching to field a question or two, but I also would love to hear your trail stories. This podcast is my way, post-trail, of connecting back with the AT community. Whether you're reliving past glory like I am on this show, prepping for an upcoming hike, or maybe you're on the trail here in 2026, or maybe you're just someone who likes hiking content, or in particular the Appalachian Trail. Whatever brings you here, I'd love to get to know you. So reach out on Instagram by following Muse Hikes, or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. Or another cool way to get in touch, and I'll start getting back to checking this regularly, is to drop a note in my trail journal if you click through to that. The trail journal has pictures with each journal entry, and sometimes I'll refer directly to the picture in the entry as I read it out, so you might want to see that. And I'll also share some photos on that Instagram account as well. There are links to the Instagram profile, the email, and the trail journal in the show notes to each episode. Whichever way you decide to reach out, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And now, back to the show. All right, a couple quick notes on these entries before we start talking gear. One quick thing about that is you're going to find out very quickly I'm like the anti-gear nerd. So if you were looking for your optimal gear recommendations, this probably isn't precisely the place for you. But we'll talk anyway about what I was thinking and how I was prepared for my Appalachian Trail journey. So a couple quick things on the entries here. We have our couple days leading up to the travel day. We have our travel day itself, kind of a long day, starting at like 4 a.m. and ending at, was it about 8, something like that. But it was great. We met Katrin for lunch. I'd actually worked with her for a number of years and actually met her in person only once before when I went over to Germany for work in the fall of 2022. The other thing we did, we introed John, who I had lunch with the day before flying out. So this is, and maybe to keep them separate, we'll go ahead and call him Tennessee John as opposed to Pennsylvania John, right? So Johnny O that we were talking about last episode would be Pennsylvania John, and then Tennessee John here I met in Damascus later in the hike, and we knocked off some miles in Tennessee together. Another aspect here that comes to light very clearly in these entries is the spiritual element of this journey. Some of you would have caught that from the entry, I am a Catholic. Now, I am not going to turn this into a platform for evangelization or anything like that, but that is an important aspect of who I am and also an important aspect of the journey that I'm really not going to shy away from either. So you will get those spiritual elements as we go through. Okay, and I think that's all that really must be said about the entries. So with that, let's go ahead and open up this gear spreadsheet and see what we're looking at here. First of all, let's talk just a little bit about base weight. So the idea of base weight, that actually means your pack without your food or your water. And I met some people who were like these ultralight folks, and that is actually a really good way to go. I do recommend that because it's less wear and tear on your body. I wasn't really one of those ultralight folks, but I do have a little summary on this spreadsheet where I was kind of adding it up. And it looks like my base weight, I was looking at about 27 pounds. And that was pretty accurate. It's also a pretty high base weight. I did weigh my pack when I was in Millinocket, and it came in right around what I had added up on the spreadsheet. But that did come down some as I learned and as I hiked and as I refined things. But I would say not a whole lot. I was never one of those like single-digit base weight ultralight guys. Again, a very good way to go. That was not part of my hike. That's going to take a little more investment, and I also had an attachment to some of the gear that I had. So, I did what I did, and it worked out for me. This summary sheet also has Haley's base weight at around 20 pounds, so she was running a little heavy as well. I'd say even if you're not one of those really ultralight folks, you probably really want to be looking at something somewhere in the mid-teens, ideally. That's going to be about all that I'll probably say about weight, although as I look at this first item that I want to talk about here, weight does come up again because my pack actually is a little bit on the heavy side. I went with the QU 2300, and that's actually 2300 cubic inches, which measures out to about 38 liters. I did purposefully go with quite a small pack, the idea being that if you limit yourself to a small pack, then you won't pack so much into it, won't pack a lot of extra stuff that you don't really need. And I think in general that was a good call. I actually really loved my pack, but the one thing about it, and I mentioned that I'd be talking a little about weight when it came to my pack, was it was heavy at 74 ounces here on the spreadsheet. And that's almost 5 pounds. And I actually remember a poet at Shaw's in Munson, he weighed my pack empty on the scale, and he came to about that same 5 pound weight. So I'm thinking that's about what that was. He was really not a fan of my pack at all when it came down to it. He really is kind of an ultralight guy for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. He also was a little bit concerned because my pack had a zipper that really zipped sort of all the way up the side. Actually, it was kind of a double zipper that zipped sort of all the way up the side, and those zippers met in the middle to kind of bring my pack together, if you will. And his take was that if that zipper failed, then I would really have a tough time because of how much it really split my pack. And I did end up having a zipper fail, and I ended up having to replace the pack because of it. So Poet was definitely right. That zipper ended up breaking right in Marion, Virginia. This was about a week after I got all my cold weather gear, so I was really straining that small cubic capacity of my backpack, and the zipper just couldn't take it anymore. So what ended up happening was the zipper broke. For about a week, I just zipped the one zipper all the way across the top, but that was really, really difficult to get started in the morning, so I did replace the pack in Damascus. I actually sent my QU pack home with John when he visited me, and it's now sitting in my garage. And it's a kind of a modular pack, so I only have to replace the one thing that did break, and I've got a perfectly good pack again. So what I got in Damascus was an ultralight Osprey that was under 2 pounds, so I shaved off a couple pounds there. Although I will say I like the fit and the comfort of my QU better, and also the organization of the QU better. But if you think about it, those are kind of the things that led it to weighing more, so there's trade-offs there. All right, let's see what else I've got here on the spreadsheet, focusing especially on things that I didn't need and maybe sent home. Well, let's just first look at the clothing. I was pretty good here. We can look at the worn clothing first, and I actually did not switch out any of this. This is what I hiked in most of the time, all the way from Maine to Georgia. So I had an Under Armour tech tee. It was a short sleeve black tech tee, and then I had some convertible hiking pants, which worked really well for me. I got those from REI. And then I actually have, and this is something I learned in the years leading up to my Philmont hike, I actually have some hiking underwear, because what I actually found in that prep back even pre-2022 was that if I went with any kind of normal, regular underwear, like cotton boxer briefs or something like that, I would end up with like chafing problems, right? Socks, I wear in gingy toe socks. Actually, when I was prone to blisters earlier in the years of hiking that I've done, I would tend to get blisters on my toes. The toe socks were an absolute game changer for that. I've not had a blister for years, and now after my hike, I can say I went throughout my whole hike without a single blister. It was also a change from boots to trail runners as well. I think the combination of the Injinji socks and the trail runners really did well for me. Now I mentioned some things that I'm going to switch out. So let's take a look at my other clothing that I actually have in what I call my clothing bag. The one thing I switched out was the bag itself, and actually a number of stuff sacks. So that's one thing I kind of learned early on, is that you don't want to travel with a whole bunch of stuff sacks because it's just empty weight for absolutely nothing. So a lot of the stuff sacks that I had, I sent those home. I did keep a waterproof stuff sack that I was glad that I kept, because when my clothing got wet, I could stick it in there and keep, the surrounding things dry. Or when other things got wet, I could stick stuff in there that I wanted to stay dry. It was really useful. I didn't use it all the time, but I did use it on occasion when I had those conditions, right? A couple of other things here that were in my clothing bag. I had a pair of running shorts that I would just generally use to sort of run around town. And Trash Panda at the AT hostel, he convinced me that I definitely didn't need those. I sent him home from Millinocket, and he was right. The convertible pants did just fine for me. The other clothing item that I ended up being surprised that I wanted to send home, ended up sending this home from Munson because I absolutely hated it in the wilderness. And it was the baseball cap that I had on my whole Philmont hike. I loved it out there at Philmont, and I'm guessing it's because of the humidity or something like that, but it was just like too much material. It was heavy. It was, I don't know, it was just annoying. And like I said, I hated it. So I just sent it home. All right, let's talk about my sleeping bag. I started with a 30-degree bag, which I'll actually call my sleeping bag. It had a few years on it and had lost some of its loft, so although it was rated 30 degrees when I initially purchased it, we're probably really looking at a 35 or 40-degree bag, to be honest. I do like to use a sleeping bag liner anyway, so I wasn't too concerned about the temperature rating on my sleeping bag, because that'll add a few degrees for you. I started the hike with a sleeping bag liner that I really loved, but I ultimately had to switch that out because it had gotten pretty torn up, and I was actually putting my foot right through it every night, which was super annoying. So I replaced this in Killington, Vermont with one that I actually hated. And funny enough, that lasted for the rest of the through hike. The sleeping bag itself, that stayed with me until Carrie and Haley came and visited in Virginia and brought me my cold weather gear. Leading up to that visit, I had just requested a few things, and one of them was actually Evan's sleeping bag, which is a 15-degree bag, a little bit newer, so that kept me warm through the rest of my hike. Next bit of gear, actually a little bit of an interesting story here. So here's my stove and my cook kit. So I actually bought a cook kit for the hike, and when I say cook kit, I'm really talking about like the actual pot. It's like a canister with a lid that can screw on. And what I would generally do is pack that canister with the stove and the fuel inside of it. And I would get a fuel canister that's not that big so that I could fit it in there. So it was just one unit in my pack. All I could find online was a stainless steel one, which I knew was not ideal both for weight and even like thermodynamics. So early in the hike, actually in Munson, I actually replaced that with a titanium one that I got from the outfitter there at Shaw's. And that went really well, worked really well. But the funny thing is that I ultimately sent that home as well. So I bought 2 cook kits, brought my old stove, but really ended up not using any of that for most of my hike. The dynamic there on the cook kit is that I was really early on enjoying cooking when it was Haley and me. And that was just our thing. We'd have dinner at the end of the day, and it was kind of just part of our routine. But once Haley left, I found that I just wasn't cooking that much. And I was perfectly fine just roughing it, I suppose, with the cold food. And as you can imagine, very constrained pack, cubic-wise, like I talked about earlier. And so all those things together just told me that I shouldn't be carrying this thing in my pack that I'm only going to use a fraction of the time. So I sent that home. That's exactly what I did. And I just ate cold food for the rest of the hike, except when I was in town. And then I would just get, something at a restaurant. So some other things here on the spreadsheet, especially things that went home. The rain pants, they went home. I never used them. I actually carried them for a pretty decent way because I had them at least all the way through Vermont. And where I actually met my hardest downpours actually was in Vermont. I had a couple of them where I just got caught and I would be like, I can't stop and put these pants on. So they never got used. So ultimately, I did go ahead and send those home. Now, my rain jacket did great. That was actually a return item to REI that I've used for years now. I got it for $50 off of the return rack, and it's done great for me. My camp shoes were actual river shoes. I was actually set to bring some slides, which really would have been fine, but I don't know if they would have done quite as well. And I had these old river shoes from a scouting expedition from years and years ago, and Carrie saw those and said, why don't you bring those on your hike? And that was a great idea. That's what ended up being my camp shoes for the entire hike, and they really did well. They were generally very comfortable, and they were especially good early on in Maine for fording rivers. They were a lot better than, say, like a pair of Crocs or slides would be, so I was really appreciative that I had those. My pack towel, I've always packed out a pack towel and something that I would use to wipe things up and whatnot, and thought it was an essential bit of gear. Turns out, I guess it wasn't that essential because I left that at a shelter somewhere early in New Hampshire. Just left it by accident. But after that, I just went without it. I didn't really replace it or anything. Now that I think about it, though, if I didn't have my cook kit, what was I going to wipe up anyway, right? So maybe that just makes sense. Next, I'll talk about my sleeping pad. Now, I started the trail with a blow-up sleeping pad. I had bought that maybe a year ahead, something like that, for the hike. And it was great. It was an REI Helix. It was comfortable. And what you're really looking for in a sleeping pad is that it's, sure, a little bit extra comfort, but what you're really going for is insulation against the cold. Whether you're in your tent and just the cold coming up off the ground, or in the shelter and anyway, the cold coming at you, sleeping pad is really there for that insulation. Well, that Helix pad, it worked really well until it didn't. I ended up switching that out, not necessarily by choice, when I woke up on the floor of a shelter one morning in Vermont. So my replacement was the other item that I bought in Killington, Vermont, in addition to the sleeping bag liner I talked about earlier. One of my observations early on, especially the northbounders that I would see, who are, of course, at this point, the much more experienced hikers on the trail, is that they had these fold-up foam pads. So I got one of those, and I would tell you I would not go back. Not so much because of the comfort. I did sacrifice just a little bit in the comfort, but I got used to that. And what it did for being able to pack my pack was absolutely amazing. I just strapped that on the outside of the pack like I saw the Nobos doing, and then I was on my way. Funny that I'm only just now coming to my tent, but I had an REI Flash Air 2, and I love it. Actually, that was one that I learned from Philmont as well, because I tented together with another guy, and he had the Flash Air 2. And it was just great because two grown men in a tent, you would think it'd be pretty cramped, but it really wasn't. We had the side zippers, so we could each both have our side of the tent and just leave and come back in the tent as we needed to. Of course, on this through hike, I didn't ever have anybody else in my tent, but it's still just a very good tent, very light, and also very roomy and easy to set up. Some things that I have in my gear that are kind of specific to me: a journal and a pen, as you already kind of knew about. And also I carried a harmonica throughout my whole hike. And now I played this a lot less than I thought I would. I thought I would kind of reconnect with the harmonica, and I played it some, but I didn't really play it nearly as much. Like I said, I thought I would. Let's just see what else I've got here on the list. I have my fire kit. What I like to do is the Vaseline covered cotton balls, and I'll even have a flint and steel and also a lighter. Now, I did end up losing my fire kit and not replacing it. And I remember that being a topic of conversation with Timber in the Smokies, because he was like a fire expert. And I was telling him, I don't even have a kit. And he said, that sounds like a bit of a safety problem. And honestly, I totally agree with him on that. I should have gotten my act together and replaced that. But luckily I got through, probably in big part because I met friends at the end there, if I'm being honest. For water filtration, I use a Sawyer squeeze. I just think that works really well. And honestly, that's pretty much what I saw everybody use. I actually replaced that about midway through when I was in Boiling Springs, just because, I mean, you can backflush them and you can keep them going, but I just decided for the second half of my trip, I'd get a new one. Now, the pouches that come with that Sawyer squeeze, though, Trash Panda at the AT Hostel, he called those complete junk and when we were doing the workshop. And you know, I actually had a failure of one of those back at Philmont, so I was very quick to agree with him on that assessment and just bought a 2-liter C-Knock from him at the outfitter there. And with that 2-liter C-Knock bag, I generally also carried 2 Smart Water bottles, a liter each, so I had 4 total liters of capacity. Now, the way I would generally do that is I would carry my C-Knock empty. So I'd only be carrying really my clean capacity, my 2 liters, and then I would just use the C-Knock at the water source. All right, some paracord that I sent home from Millinocket that didn't even go on trail with me, some sunglasses. Now, I had read some stuff that it was questionable whether you even need sunglasses or not on the AT because it's said to be a green tunnel, but I brought them and I was glad that I had them because you end up in the sun often enough. Oh, and the guidebook. The guidebook, that's an interesting one. The guidebook weighing it at 8.8 ounces, so that ends up being over a half a pound. So at the beginning of the hike, I wanted to be a little more rustic, I suppose, and I would actually just write physically in the guidebook, kind of make my plans in there. But I also had a spreadsheet that I had started before I even got on trail as well. So at the very beginning, I was really doing my planning in the spreadsheet, and I had that on my phone. It was just an Excel spreadsheet, but I was also then writing it in the guidebook. And then I would try to make that a little bit lighter by tearing some of the pages out, sending the guidebook home, and then have that brought back to me whenever my family visited. The thing is, this whole thing with the guidebook was kind of dumb. I had the guidebook on PDF on my phone too, and I also had the Far Out app. So I didn't really need a guidebook at all. Eventually, I did finally just send the guidebook home altogether. And last but not least, my trekking poles. My trekking poles were pretty cool because they both telescoped and also folded. And so I could even fold up my trekking poles while not breaking stride. And I would do this often as I'm walking into a town. I don't really need the trekking poles anymore. Now I'm walking on a road. I just start folding them up, and I just didn't even have to stop to do it, which I was a really big fan of. And these trekking poles were actually quite durable. At least they were right at first, because there were times in the mountains of Maine and New Hampshire that I put my full weight on those to keep myself from, barreling down the mountain. And those trekking poles saved my life. But ultimately, they did kind of fail on me. Well, ultimately, they did fail on me. And I think that was because this was down on Roan Mountain in Tennessee. And I think it was the lateral pressure on them as I was pushing them through snow. Because when I was on Roan Mountain, there were spots that it was like 1.5 feet, 2 feet of snow. And I was working through that day, and the trekking poles just didn't make it out of that day. I would ultimately have my family bring me Evans trekking poles in Irwin, Tennessee, and I would finish the hike with those. What trekking poles are really all about, they not only give you that extra stability, like I just mentioned, kind of extra balance and kind of keeping me from falling over, they're really advisable for anybody to hike to keep the pressure off of your knees. Now, I have knee problems anyway, so for me, it was kind of an absolute necessity to hike with trekking poles all the time. That kind of brings me to most of the gear selections here. I've hit like all the top things on this spreadsheet. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this episode. I hope that was pretty cool as we get sort of towards the end of our pre-trail time here and ready to go onto the trail to see what the culmination of this prep really was. Tune in next time to hear Muse's musings from a bus station. Next episode, we'll take a little pause to go a bit deep before continuing our story in the lovely town of Millinocket, Maine. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe if you haven't already. And if you'd like to get general updates or message me with feedback or questions, follow Muse Hikes on Instagram or email me at museatpodcast@gmail.com. Until then, this has been Muse. Thank you for walking with me, and happy trails.